Many countries around the world are slowly reopening for business. Some regions of Italy are now open. Israel says it's going to be opening in April and Britain in June. As for Canada, our Chief Medical Officer of Health says we should be able to reduce some public health measures by September. To discuss this in more detail is political reporter Brian Lilley joining me once again from Toronto. Brian, why is Canada lagging so far behind?
It comes down to one word: vaccines. The old real estate term is location, location, location. Right now it's vaccines, vaccines, vaccines. But even beyond that, Dr. Theresa Tam, the chief medical officer, who said, if more people getting vaccinated will be a good thing, she was still saying, but we're still going to have to keep wearing masks and social distancing. And I'm thinking, okay, at what point do we get to be normal again? At what point do we get to see family and friends, hug a loved one that doesn't live in our own home, go to a restaurant, go to opening day? Israel's going to be opening up around the time that the Blue Jays should be having opening day at Rogers Centre here in Toronto. I had tickets for last year's event to go, didn't get to go, don't get to go this year. Who knows when that sort of thing will come back? But other countries are getting back to normal because they have adequate supplies of vaccine. And the Trudeau government has been thumping its chest quite a bit this week because we've got the biggest order ever. 643,000 combined Pfizer and Moderna doses showing up, Hal. Or as Joe Biden likes to say, what they use before lunch in the United States, because they're doing between 1.5 and 2 million doses a day. If you don't think that it's right to compare Canada to the United States, pick one of the other 46 countries ahead of us in line in terms of vaccinating the percentage of their population. On a per capita basis, we're at 48th right now. We haven't been out of the 40s in about 2 weeks now. We bounce around a little bit, but, we're not in a spot where a G7 nation should be. And so we're going to continue living without our ability to go to festivals and concerts and all the things that make summer great. That's being canceled. Every major event until July 2nd in the city of Toronto has been canceled. And listening to the health officials here, don't expect them to suddenly turn on the event lights on July 2nd.
Well, here in Lethbridge, the Whoop Up Days was canceled. The legendary Calgary Stampede was canceled. Calgary's my hometown. I grew up there. And Brian, we still don't have the Canadian Football League. The Canadian Football League, the CFL, your Ticats, my Stamps. I mean, something has to give here eventually. And let me ask you something. Have the Liberals been talking potentially about helping out the CFL? I can't see them surviving if they're going to be shut down again this season.
I don't believe the issue has gone that far ahead so far this year. There were discussions last year that didn't go very far. There isn't a lot of appetite in Canada for politicians handing out money to professional sports athletes, even if in the CFL, a lot of them are not making very much money. I think that it might be popular in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Not sure how well it would play in Alberta, but probably better than here in Ontario or in British Columbia, where I doubt it would receive an awful lot of support. Last year, when they were looking at playing in a bubble, Manitoba and Saskatchewan were trying to outbid each other to get the league to show up there. So there is some support across the prairies, but overall, not a lot of support for taxpayers' dollars going into that sort of thing.
Well, you can be sure here in Alberta between the Stampeders and the Edmonton Football Club, we want to get that rivalry going once again here. Now let's get back to the vaccines for just a moment, Brian. There's been a lot of back and forth between Ottawa and the provinces when it comes to the rollouts. Trudeau says he was frustrated with doses being in freezers instead of people's arms, while the premiers say they were frustrated by a lack of the vaccines. Now the deliveries are picking up. Are provinces keeping up?
Yes and no. I mean, they're starting to ramp back up. Remember, they went down to near zero. At one point, I had an Alberta official tell me that on a given Sunday, they had vaccinated, I think it was 75 people. Ontario's lowest day was about 2,200 people from what should have been 25,000 a day and climbing. So they were going up, 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 and then suddenly went down to just over 2,000 in the province of Ontario. The biggest province in the country population-wise, the place with 40% of the country's population, handing out next to no vaccines. Well, they've got to ramp it back up. So yes, when you look at percentage of doses used, Ontario, Alberta, Saskatchewan are all tend to be pretty high, in the mid 80s to 90% of doses used. But that's a rotating cycle. The doses are coming in, they're going out the door. You know, in order to use as many as are coming in, Ontario has to, by this weekend, be up to about 25,000 doses a day. Retired General Rick Hillier tells me he'll be there. Speaking with the Saskatchewan and Alberta governments, they're telling me that they're going to be ramping up as well, that they will get there. So unfortunately, though, after several rough weeks for the Prime Minister, a lot of his supporters online are saying, why are premiers leaving doses in freezers? Well, you can't get a delivery on Wednesday night and on Thursday morning expect that you're going to have hundreds of thousands of doses administered by the morning. But it's become very political. The Trudeau Liberals took a big shot on this. It hasn't worked out well for them. They would like to go towards a spring election still, I think. And so expect more shots to be taken from Ottawa at premiers, including by members of the party, not just their friends and trolls on Twitter.
Brian, the rule requiring people entering Canada to quarantine for at least 3 days at a hotel has not got off to a very good start. Now, some people are refusing to, and there are other reports that other people have allegedly been sexually assaulted when they were forced to quarantine, and the Conservatives are calling for a scrap of the hotel quarantine altogether.
Yeah, I mean, let's start off with the least serious of these. Yeah, some people have just said, you know what? I'm not going to spend $2,000 to be in a hotel for 3 days. I'll pay the fine that is about $860, I believe it is, and they're not being stopped by the cops. They are simply being ticketed. Well, the ticket is less than 3 days in the hotel. Now, if you do check into the hotel, some people have been saying, you know, there was a bit of, pushback from the government saying, oh, don't worry, it won't be $2,000. Well, then we started getting bills sent to us at the Sun for $1,900. There's a big difference. It's only $1,900, not $2,000. But people are getting their test back and they test negative, so they're allowed to leave. Well, they've maybe only spent a day and a half in the hotel. They say, can we get some of our money back? And the answer is no. Now, on the most serious problem, 2 different incidents of alleged sexual assault, one in the Montreal area, one in the Toronto area. Police in Halton, which is the suburban area just to the west of Toronto's Pearson Airport, they're now investigating claims of a sexual assault at a hotel by someone who was hired to work security there. A similar incident happening in Montreal. So yes, a number of Conservative MPs, including Michelle Rempel-Garner, Tamara Jensen, and others saying, Shannon Stubbs, it's time for this to end. It's time to put a stop to this. This move went far beyond what most of the premiers had been calling for. They'd been calling just for testing at airports, some real restrictions to make sure that people were quarantining properly. And the government went from saying travel's not an issue and mocking the idea that you had to be worried about people traveling into the country with COVID to suddenly saying, we're going to have this big apparatus and it's going to cost you big time. I think they did overkill, and I don't think they were ready for what they've wrought on the Canadian public.
After pausing immigration to our country during the pandemic, it appears as though the federal Liberals are quietly admitting record numbers of people into the country once again. Tell me a bit more about that.
They're looking at admitting more than 400,000 people this year. Now, of course, they paused immigration. That was supposed to be their goal last year, but they paused it, saying, look, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Large swaths of the economy are shut down. Millions upon millions of Canadians lost their jobs. There were more than 2 million unemployed and I believe 2 million underemployed, people who had lost significant hours of work. And so they said it just doesn't make sense. Well, the unemployment rate is still very high. So I'm not sure why at this point, when we are worried about new variants coming in from other parts of the world, when we are worried about the not hundreds of thousands, but millions of Canadians that remain unemployed, why we've suddenly decided quietly to start ramping up. So we're looking at 400,000 people this year. The numbers in January were more than 26,000, and that is significantly higher than the same period last year. And the federal Liberals, including Immigration Minister Marco Mendicino, say they will continue to ramp it up. I'm not sure that Canadians know that this is what's happening yet. And I'm not sure that it would get the same sort of buy-in that it normally does. Canadians, regardless of political stripe, tend to support immigration, but they do have some questions about it in the middle of a pandemic when there are so many unemployed, when people simply can't get to work, and when the recovery will take quite a bit of time. Is it even right to the immigrants coming in to say, yeah, come on into Canada? There's a good chunk of our economy shut down. Try and find your way in that. It's going to be tough for all sides in this.
Now, do you think perhaps potentially the Liberals are thinking of more votes? That's why they're letting him in. And the reason I ask that is many European families that I talked to many years ago, when Pierre Elliott Trudeau, his father, let in a lot of immigrants, said, you know, we're always going to vote Liberal because they took care of us and our family, and we're going to pass that on for generations to our kids. Maybe is there a similar mindset now with Justin?
There is a bit of that, and look, every party in power has used immigration as a vote getter in terms of how they change the immigration system. The Conservatives under both Stephen Harper and Brian Mulroney did the same thing, but they wouldn't get those votes for some time. What they would still get are the votes of the organizers in various immigrant and ethnic communities who are now citizens and are able to vote. That's whose votes they will continue to get and continue to rely on. And then, of course, yes, they do, try and bring people along for the years to come. Wouldn't be immediate, but they would be able to rely on some communities to continue supporting them.
Brian, the medical assistance and dying bill is back before the House of Commons after being amended in the Senate. Now, critics say it's still a bill that greases up the slippery slope for assisted suicide for people with mental illness.
Yeah, Senator Denise Batters, who lost her husband Dave, he was a Conservative MP, died of suicide many years ago, and she is one of the main advocates in Parliament saying this is heading in the wrong direction. But she's not alone. MP Michael Cooper, Tamara Jensen, Michael Barrett, several of them are getting together to say, look, this has to change. All of this started, the changes that are being debated on medical assistance in dying, over a court challenge. And it was a lower court. The government could have challenged it. They could have appealed the ruling, but they didn't because it fit with where they wanted to take it. Remember, the medical assistance in dying was brought about by a different court challenge. They had to find a way to meet the Supreme Court's ruling. Now they're trying to meet a lower court ruling, and there's a bit of back and forth. There was hope that some of the elements that would open it up for mental illness to be a consideration would be taken out in the Senate. That didn't happen. Now they're going to try and take it out in the House of Commons. I don't have a lot of hope. It seems like this is the direction that Parliament is going to go one way or another. But this is the slippery slope that so many of us did warn about when this became an issue years ago.
Yeah, Alex Schadenberg from Euthanasia Prevention Coalition is still horrified by what's transpired with this bill. A Liberal MP who introduced a bill for a guaranteed universal income, Brian, says she now has the support from some cabinet ministers. Can we expect to potentially see this in the Trudeau government's March budget?
Well, if they really do want to go to the polls, this might be one of the things that they talk about. I wouldn't expect to see it fully endorsed. The Liberal MP in question is from the middle of Toronto, right on the Danforth. Her name's Julie Dershowitz, and she won't say how many cabinet ministers support it, but there are many. I wouldn't be surprised if Chrystia Freeland, the finance minister, supports it. Her book is behind me on the shelf somewhere, and she endorses an awful lot of very left-wing political causes and economic issues in her book, Plutocrats. So I could definitely see Freeland doing that. The Prime Minister has not warmed to the idea so far, but my theory, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, is that they're hoping to get just enough vaccines to look after people in nursing homes and to start bringing down the number of deaths and hospitalizations, bring in a good news budget at the end of March, and then shortly after Easter say, we need to build back better, and the Prime Minister will say he needs a new mandate to do that. So we could see a hint at something like a universal basic income in the budget, like we've seen hints from the Liberals saying we're going to bring in pharmacare, and we're going to bring in a national childcare program. If they keep bringing in all these programs, I don't know what any of us will be paying for anymore out of our own pockets, but they keep talking about it, but not delivering. In fact, just this week, the Liberals voted against an NDP bill on bringing in a national pharmacare program.
Brian, we only have a few moments left here, but I wanted to talk to you about this here. Canada's new top military commander stepped aside following a claim of sexual misconduct. Admiral Art MacDonald is now under investigation by the Canadian military's National Investigative Service.
Yeah, and this happening shortly after he took over, And shortly after he took over from retired General Jonathan Vance was named as someone who was being investigated for past misconduct involving female subordinates. Now, an incident that took place on a ship in 2010. We don't know any details other than there is some speculation in the media that alcohol was involved, and that's it. That's all we know. Now we've got the previous Chief of Defense Staff under investigation. We've got the current Chief of Defense Staff under investigation, and questions about whether the military has ever taken the issue of the treatment of women in the military seriously when they've come forward. It doesn't appear so if the most recent top two guys wouldn't have, passed the test that they wanted to put everyone else through.
Political reporter and columnist for the Toronto Sun, Brian Lilley, thanks again for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.